Okay. What I do without you? So we're talking about the Rashba and his fairly strict attitude towards the preservation of orthodoxy. Came from a very wealthy family, the Aderet, Shlomo ben Avraham ibn Aderet. Aderet means a very fine piece of clothing. You may remember Esav had an Aderet. Okay, Aderet is a very fine piece of clothing, and as part of the Spanish custom was to give names that would indicate your family status and wealth. So this was a very fine family that was very wealthy, and apparently was in the apparel making business. So if you go to Barcelona today and you take a tour of the Jewish quarter, they will point out to you the Aderet traditional site of their home. Anyhow, he's one of the greats mentioned by Rabbi Yosef Karo, and outstanding responder and Meshiv. So let's have a look. Sheila, line 29. בהמה שנמצאת יתרת איבר באותן איברים שנטרפת בהן ובמקום שנטרפת בו. An animal which has an extra limb, and remember we said extra limbs are as bad as not having an organ or a limb, the animal is treif. But she's lived more than 12 months. Now remember, the rule was that treifot are defined by the capacity to live less than 12 months. Treifa kamoa lo chaya, says the Gemara. If it's a treifa, it will never live more than 12 months. What happens, says the questioner, if we have an animal that halachically is defined as a treifa, but actually, from the point of view of practical reality, it lived for more than 12 months. Do we say that since it has lived more than 12 months, okay, from an empirical point of view, let's make it kosher, the treifa eina chaya 12 chodesh. Now I heard a authority in my town who says, definitely, if it's lived more than 12 months, the animal may be defective, but it's not treif. But I would like you, the Rashba, to tell me what you think. Tshuva, the Rashba answers in no uncertain terms. If anybody gives you a heta for anything that the Gemara defines as treif, al tishmalo, v'lo tovei elav. You shall not listen, nor shall you go with him. That's an expression taken from Sefer Dvarim in relation to following a false prophet. Okay, lo tovei elav v'lo tishma. V'lo tieh kazot b'Yisrael. Heaven forfend that this sort of thing goes on. And whoever says it's kosher is putting the rabbis into disrepute. I'm going to go on about this because we need to set up a fence around this whole issue. We don't want foxes, that is, insignificant people, going into the orchard, creeping through cracks in the fence. We have 8 basic treifot, then we have 8, and then we have 70. The Katani b'Sefer Dematanitin, and the Mishnah says, Klal, Kol Shen Kamo Achaya, treifa. Whoever, which no treifa is going to live for. Amrina la b'Gemara detana dematnitin itlei treifa eina chaya omai detana tana omai delot tana lotana. It's a list, a closed list. You cannot add and you cannot detract. Kol makom kol otan shenu chachamim mishateinu omar shenu chachamim bichlalan אי אפשר להם בשום צד לבוא לידי היטל עולם. Nothing in the list of forbidden defects can ever be koshered. והיותרת הרי היא בכלל הנטולין. And extra is the same as missing. V'chidama Rav Huna kol yeter kin natul dami. Another basic rule in chulin. Any yitra, extra limb, extra head, leg, hand, is like it was missing in its treif. Ve'im tashuva ma'aseh farayinu beinenu yitrat beregel sheshat ha-12 chodesh. But we have seen that an extra leg, in fact, the animal lived for more than 12 months. Zohi shama Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yossi ben Horai, al da'at samich. Are you relying on that? It cannot possibly be true. In other words, the empirical evidence is false. And you cannot, unless you saw the animal the whole time, you cannot testify. There must be another reason why the animal lived. In other words, your diagnosis was wrong. It didn't have an extra limb. It wasn't suffering from one of the defects in the list in the Gemara. You, the witness, who tells us the story that this animal, which is halachically treif, apparently lived for more than 12 months, you got it wrong. We have to ask this person who says this animal definitely lived more than a year. How do you know? Shema shachachta or shema ta'ita. You forgot. You got the time wrong. You made a mistake. Or shema nitchalef lecha bisman. Or shema nitchalcha lecha behema zo ba'acher.
Which roof?
Can we have muting, please?
I'm worried if you don't take it off, over time it's going to call it a...
Can we have muting, please?
Why don't you wear any shoes, Sophia?
Bernie, do you have a background noise? No. So,
I need to
It looks like
Yael.
Yonat.
Yael. No.
Is Yonat in Switzerland?
Yonat is in Switzerland.
Yes, I think it was her phone that
Okay.
calls in.
Whatever. Anyhow. So we ask the person and we say, how do you know? You made a mistake. You didn't remember. You've got the wrong animal. They look the same. I'm on line 43. You couldn't possibly have your eyes on this animal day or night for 12 months. ואם תתחזק בטעותו ויאמר לא, כי אהבתי דברים זרים והם אשר ראו עיניהם ואחריהם אלך, נאמר עליו להוציא לעז על דברי חכמים אי אפשר. And if he's stubborn, we say, look, you're just trying to unseat the rabbis, and we're not going to believe you. ויבטל המעיד ואלף כיוצא בו. Doesn't matter if there are 100 like him. ואל תבטל נקודה אחת במה שהסכימו בו חכמי ישראל הקדושים, הנביאים ובני הנביאים, ודברים שנאמרו למשה מסיני. So we are not prepared to accept any testimony of this nature, okay? The soft davar. Ranon, would you like to take this down from line 45? The soft davar.
From line
45 on
one. Yes, okay.
I've kind of made up for a little bit of time. The soft davar mutav.
בסוף דבר, מוטב נחזור אחר הטענות כדי לקיים דבריהם, ולא שנדחה דבריהם המקודשים האמיתיים, המקוימים, ונעמוד ונקיים דברים בטלים של אלו.
In other words, your job as an Orthodox Jew is to defend halakha against anything that arises out of practical reality. We cannot tolerate any contradiction. The Talmud says a rule about real life, that the treifa will not live for more than 12 months. We will not believe anyone who comes along on the basis of any evidence at all and says it did. So we can never change. Whatever veterinary science says, we will never change the rules of Tarfut. וכמה צריכים.
וכמה צריכים בעלי הנפש והחיל, אשר נגע אלוהים בליבם, להישמר ולהתרחק מן המקילים, מתוך הפטפוטים.
Exactly. Pitputin are idle, vain words. We have to defend Chazal against those who want to make kulot on the basis of vain and rather fatuous statements. She'en hakol biki'in.
ואין הכל בקיאים בתשובות השאלות, והדברים שעוקרים את התחומים אשר גבלו ראשונים.
אלא צריכים hakol.
אלא צריכים הכל לשמור העיקרון המסורים בידן של ישראל.
העיקרים. Okay. ואפילו,
העיקרים, right, of course. ואפילו בין כל הרוחות שבעולם לא יזיזו אותם ממקומם. ואין מן הראוי לשמוע ממי שבא להורות במה שלא שערום האבות הראשונים.
Sa'arum, לא sa'arum avotechem.
Right.
Okay, as your ancestors did not imagine.
המכשילה את הרבים. וכל שכן אם לא היה המתיר חכם גדול וירא אלוהים, ושאין ליבו גס בהוראה.
The concept of lev gasvar as somebody who makes halakhic decisions, but he's actually, as we say in French, a grobeyung, and he doesn't understand the niceties of halakha or respect the balei halakha, and therefore such an individual is to be entirely ignored. Okay, libo gas, his heart is heavy. He's gas. He treads, he's like a bull in a china shop. He'll just move in. So there we are. Now, just to mention the Shach, Jean, would you like to read the Shach, please? Rabbi Shabtai Kohen.
I would like to ask before.
Okay.
Indeed, donc I think donc שלושה, שבע, 18 טרפות נאמרו למשה מסיני. And what is the difference between נאמרו למשה מסיני and הלכה למשה מסיני? This is my question.
Between what?
Eh bien, פה כתוב, וכך כתוב בגמרא, נאמרו למשה מסיני.
Okay.
ואם אני זוכר, יש ערוך לנר שמקדיש, ששם את ההדגשה על השינוי בין נאמרו למשה מסיני והלכה למשה מסיני.
Bevadai yesh. So I'll say this in English because we are, after all, in.
Oh, yes, excuse me.
But the whole concept of halakha Moshe Sinai is an interesting one. Now, I'm not going to give you a whole list of authorities, but the Rosh is very famous for saying that halakha Moshe Sinai is a concept. It doesn't have anything to do with history. It doesn't mean that something was actually meant historically to have been told to Moshe on Har Sinai. What it means is that we give it a category that makes it superior as a form, if you like, of midrabanan and makes it very close to midoraita, okay?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't need to have a formal source. So you could say it is as clear as if it was halakha Moshe Sinai. So Rabbi Akiva replies and says, halakha Moshe Sinai, then he means that this is as clear as if it were given to Moshe on Har Sinai. So there is Re'iyah, there is also Yidiyah, because it says the Kol Talmid, okay, that Moshe Rabbeinu Ra Kol Ma Shekol Talmid Yagid in the future. So there is a Re'iyah, and Re'iyah there also doesn't mean necessarily a Yidiyah. So there is halakha Moshe Sinai, which is a category all by itself, a formal category. There is Re'iyah. In other words, there's a sense that somehow we are connected to what was on Har Sinai. But that connection is not one of Yidiyah. In other words, you cannot see it very clearly, but you are postulating that there is such a connection without it having the official title of halakha Moshe Sinai. In other words, Re'iyah, Beli, Yidiyah. And if you like, I'll send you an email, Beli Neder, with the sources for this. There's also a very interesting Tiferet Israel on this idea of the difference between halakha Moshe Sinai Yidiyah and Mashe Nir'eh, or Mashe Moshe Ra'ah Bahar Sinai. But that's a very nice pickup. Yes, there is a difference, and we could spend time on that, but we shan't.
Rabbi, may I ask a question on our Inyan?
Yes, sure. Yeah.
Could we not say that behema with 5 legs is treif, and thereby not violate the words of Chazal without questioning the witness who said that it lived 12 months?
Because the two things are absolutely connected in the Gemara. The Gemara gives a definition of treifa and says treifa kamoha lo chaya. It cannot live for more than 12 months. You come along and say, well, I have had this cow. It had an extra leg, or it was missing a leg, okay, or a hind quarter, and it lived for 5 years. Rashba says you tell that person he made a mistake, he misdiagnosed, he got the wrong animal, anything but to say that. And the Gemara, by the way, the Mishnah and the Gemara and the Chulin are very insistent. The list of treifot is a closed list. It's a numerous clauses. And nothing you can say is going to change that.
Well,
This is how we...
Can I ask you what's
Sure.
the use of testifying when you say you can only testify if you say A, but if you testify B, it's not allowed? I mean, then why testify at all?
It's called religion. Religion has its way of getting at the truth. I'm going to say lahavdil elef havdalot, okay? But when the Inquisition was around on the Catholic Church, they would torture people on the rack in order to get them to confess. Is that a valid confession? Of course not. If you're being tortured on the rack, you will say whatever the torturer wants you to say. But that doesn't matter because you're doing it for the sake of God. So this is what the Rashba has been saying. He's been telling us that you will not accept evidence that flies in the face of the corpus of the Jewish tradition. And by the way, if you don't think that attitude exists today, you ask a real Haredi what they think about fossils. And what will the Haredi say? Even if he's prepared to hear that, scientifically speaking, a fossil must be 45 billion years old, he'll say, God planted it as a test to see if you would believe the scientists and leave the Torah that says that all life was created on day one and we are tashpav.
No, he will also say that God created many worlds before ours, and this is a rest from previous worlds.
He may not, even though you're citing the Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah, and you're also citing, to jump a long time, Rav Kook. Nevertheless, he will say it's only a Midrash and it doesn't mean what the scientists say. Okay, Yotzer Olamot Macharivan is a spiritual concept. And even Rav Kook, who does use this when he writes to his student in Switzerland, studying at the Zurich Polytechnic, okay? He says to him, look, we can explain Kabbalistically evolution and the many, many, many years that lie behind evolution, but it's not that important, okay? Rav Kook says if you want to believe it, you can. Don't feel bad, okay? But it's not something that is really important for us. What's important for us is faith and the religion. So there is, of course, a position, but I was careful to say you're Haredi, okay? You're deep-dyed, I don't know whether to say Chosid or Litvak, but whoever. And we'll see what Rabbi Eliyahu Eliezer Dessler has to say about this, okay? But I'd like to go through Rabbi Eibeshitz first, and I'll see if I can weaken your confidence in the validity of science, okay? But we will get to that. In the meantime, we will read the Shach, Rabbi Shabtai Cohen of Vilna, his well-known and well-used commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. Shach Yored Deya Siman Nun Zayin Sif Katan Mem Chet. We're jumping from the 13th century Rashba, okay? He died in the very early 14th century, to the 17th century Rabbi Shabtai Cohen. Jean, would you please read?
משמע מדברי הרשב"א, שם
Sham.
צריך לומר, דהי חיה י"ב חודש, על כוחה נס הוא, אבל על כל פנים תכיפה היא.
So here you see the Shach says, actually, not only do we, it was not necessarily disbelieving the witness or the person who said this is more than 12 months, but miracles can happen. Miracles can happen. There are nisim. So the animal has lived longer because there was a nes. In other words, God caused this animal to live longer, but still it is trefa. The Chazon Ish has a lot to say about that. You can look him up, Hilchot Trefot, Siman He. Okay, so now we're going to go back to Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz, with whom we left last time. Remember, he was joined his senior colleague, Rabbi David Oppenheim in Prague, opposed to the Chacham Tzvi. And we also read about the effects of this dispute, which spilled over way beyond Hamburg and the family with the heartless chicken. It involved the rabbis of Europe at the time, and the Chacham Tzvi was deeply hurt. And according to his son, Rabbi Yaakov Emden, he met an early death because of the Agamat Nefesh that was later, of course, combined with his fight with the Amsterdam community over Rabbi Chayun, Nehemiah Chayun, and that whole Sabbatean controversy. But it certainly didn't do him any good, but he was adamant that science will prevail, Jack. Rav Chacham Tzvi said, cannot live without a heart, but all of them, Oppenheim and Eibeshitz and Yosef Katz, all said that we take the Shulchan Aruch and the Gemara. Literally, doesn't have a heart, it is a trefa. That's not possible. It must have had a heart, was eaten by a cat. No, we do not. We prefer the laws of Edut to the evidence of science. The Atan Navo. So now we have a large chunk in Hebrew, and I'll perhaps tell you a little about what Rabbi Eibeshitz says. But the first bit is actually, well, it's interesting. So I'll just explain this to you in English. I will not read the Hebrew necessarily. But Rabbi Eibeshitz goes over the case, talks about the heartless chicken and the cat and the girl and her mother, talks about the Kesef Mishneh, okay, that must have had a heart, but the heart was either torn out or there was a disease that basically caused the heart to disappear. And that's why Chacham Tzvi says it must have had a heart, okay, some type of heart, and the cat ate it. Now, Rabbi Eibeshitz says on line 11, V'zeu yafeh horeh. Actually, Chacham Tzvi is okay with this decision. Ki talinan tamid b'davar hamatzui v'shachiach. Because we go after what is more likely to have happened. It's not often. Now, Eibeshitz doesn't say it can never happen. He says it's not often that you can have a heartless chicken which has been perfectly healthy before you shechted it, okay? לקח תנינן בחתול וכדומה, ובוודאי מה שנמצאו בפרנקפורט, בגיליון השולחן ערוך, הובא בחכם צבי, בשם הרב מפראג. Remember those marginal notes written by the Maharal of Prague? So Rabbi Eibeshitz, of course, is very respectful. He's in Prague. Maharal is a very respected figure. He says, Shehitir nitala lev hayal ze ofen. So that was probably what happened. In other words, there was a case of a heartless chicken. Nobody came and gave any testimony. There was we assume that the chicken had a heart, that something happened to it after shchita. אבל בסוף דבריו שאפילו נפתחת התרנגולת בעדים כשרים והעידו שהשגיחו ולא נמצא לב, פסק כי עדים שקרי המה. So, the psak of the Chacham Tzvi, that the Eidim in the case in Hamburg, that is mainly the girl, are false witnesses and not to be believed, that is not possible at all, says Rabbi Eibeshitz. ונשאל על רשב"א, שכתב כן גבי ודאי טרפיו שהעידו שחי יותר מי"ב חודש. Now the Chacham Tzvi uses the Rashba that we just learned to say that Well, we don't listen to witnesses. So we don't take what the girl said seriously. Hifriz al hamida beyoter. Now, this is absolutely unacceptable. And that's why I'm just going to go back to line 9. Dvarav tchilato matok v'sofan maror. The Chacham Tzvi begins sweetly, but he ends up bitterly. V'lo yachlu adat b'nei Yisrael lishtotan ki marim hen. And the waters are too bitter for the Israelites to swallow. Back to the
Mara.
Rashba. So, Chacham Tzvi says, look, we just read the Rashba. The Rashba says that if witnesses say the animal lived for more than 12 months, do we believe them?
No.
No, we don't believe them. So likewise, in this case, says the Chacham Tzvi, we don't believe the witnesses because they are contradicted by the fact that you cannot have a chicken living without a heart. How is Rabbi Eibeshitz going to tear that argument apart? What's wrong there? And what would you say if you were trying to attack the Chacham Tzvi? Why is the Rashba not a good source to rely on? I know it's late, but can anybody work this out? What do you think? Okay, I hear silence, so I think I'm going to have to fill it in.
Expound.
I'll have to expound.
The Rashba is
איך
against
מדבר
me.
חומרה לכולה?
Thank you, Avi. There we are. The Rashba is machmir halachically. The Chacham Tzvi wants to be mekel. It's oranges and lemons. Rashba says we don't believe the Eidim because the Gemara says that it cannot live more than 12 months. Chacham Tzvi says we won't believe the Eidim that there's a missing heart because science tells us that it must have had a heart. And we are going to be mekel vis-a-vis halacha. So Eibeshitz gets very angry and says, how can you possibly compare the two? What we do as responsible rabbis is to defend halacha, not to tear halacha down. The Rashba was disregarding evidence that flies in the face of halacha. You, Chacham Tzvi, want to disregard kosher evidence because it's flying in the face of science. Mi shama davar kazeh. How can you say such a thing? Inconceivable. So, therefore, I'm discounting the Chacham Tzvi support from the Rashba and not accepting it at all. So, line 26, Uviprat. Now he takes a second tack, a critical tack. Jack, this is for you, especially. Uviprat yisodot ha'teva banui al pi nisayon. Now, science is based upon experiment. Hayom haytas gamakach, and we know that science changes. Today, we agreed on a scientific explanation. But science changes, and there are scientists and physicians here. Okay? Avi, Marcel, David,
Yeah.
does science change from time to time?
Well, science, the methodology doesn't change, but their hypotheses and the conclusions change.
Absolutely. Once upon a time, we all believed, well, because we weren't alive, that phlogiston caused burning, right? Some of us believed for 1,000 years that we breathe in air to cool down the heart. All that is nonsense. Okay? But
we never contradicted our observations.
We never contradicted our observations, but the explanations we gave. So what I'm trying to say that science is always liable to change. And once you get a mixture of science and law, you're going to get into trouble because things are going to become outdated. I'll just give you an illustration from abortion law. The Supreme Court of America ruled in Roe against Wade in 1973 that a fetus is not viable until it's been in the womb for two trimesters. That's 6 months. And therefore, the point of guilt for an abortion, okay, was only from that point onwards. Before that, it was considered to be non-viable. Today, viability has changed. We can bring a premature baby, as it were, preserve it in life outside of the womb in an incubator much earlier than 6 months. And so the law finds itself in crisis. So what Eibeshitz, I think, is trying to get at is that science and law may not be good partners, okay? Once you take one on board, you're going to have to change the law, and law loves stability, and science loves open-mindedness, if I can put it like that. So let's read on and see what he has to say. V'chen tamid, ad ki achshav al yedei nisayon. He, of course, latches on to the experiment thing, okay? He looks at the conclusion, Bernie, rather than the method. But the methods have also changed, because methods of running an experiment depend upon our understanding of the science. Nasogu achor mamash mikol hanachat Galinus. Who is Galinus?
Galen.
Galen, exactly. Galen, the famous Greek doctor in Rome in the 1st and 2nd centuries, who laid the foundations for European medicine for 1,000 years. Aristotle, they were following Galen and Aristotle well into the 16th and 17th centuries, till William Harvey in 1628 came along and debunked Galen, and then there was kind of a collapse of the house of cards. So, writing in the 17th and early 18th centuries, Rabbi Eibeshitz says this happens all the time. אם כן, איך בשביל יסודות טבע המציאות נכחיש העדים ונתיר יסוד טרפה וספק שלה? Are we going to allow science to upset the prohibition of trefa and the edim? We, in halacha, follow edim. It's edut that matters, not science. וכל זה אילו הדבר מוסכם וברור בלי חולק מבעלי התורה. And that would even be if there was no conflict with something halachic. It is a trefa if there's no heart. And the Rambam didn't count it as a nevela. It's not that it was sick and ill and attacked before shchita. No. ולכן חס ושלום להקל באופן כזה. והנה ברור לפעמים נמאס ניטל הלב. Then he actually raises a new idea. How do you know that every animal breathes using the heart? Could there possibly be another organ in the body, say located close to the heart, that does the same thing, but we've never known about it and we haven't yet discovered it? Is that possible? Doesn't look like a heart at all. It's the same chambers as a heart, and it does the same thing. Now, with a big animal, we definitely be aware of that. But with a small animal, like a chicken, you might not even be aware that such an organ exists. So it could be that our particular chicken never had a heart. It is nital halev, it is trefa. But how come it was alive before it was shechted? There was a different organ in the body that we didn't know about and still don't know about that fulfills the function of a heart. Is that absolutely impossible? Well, anybody prepared to say absolutely impossible, could never happen? We will never, ever discover an alternative to the heart. Well, philosophically speaking, we know what we know because it's always been that way. The sun shines every morning, okay? Is it possible that sometime in the future, something else will provide light to the earth other than the sun? It's highly unlikely. But can we say with absolute logical certainty that nothing like that will ever happen? I'll leave you to mull over that, okay? But this is what Eibeshitz is trying to establish. Now, he doesn't let it rest there, but he says, Ulaman Beirur Hadvarim, line 40, Ki Torah hi v'lo yeh giraon b'melechet shamayim. But in order to defend the Torah, Kamti v'katavti al yidei hayashish hatorani hamufle, marenu harav Rabbi Heinach Hali, Rabbi Heinach from Hali, which is actually Halle in Germany. I wrote to my friend, a good frum Jew called Heinach, and I wanted him to ask the physicians at the University of Halle in their medical school about the issue. Now, again, I'm going to give you a précis of what happens, and we're just going to take this up when we get to the second Sheila. The physicians write back, and he's translated their Latin into Hebrew. I told you, Eibeshitz was a very educated rabbi, knew many languages, astronomy, mathematics, quite a polymath and a genius. So he says, look, the doctors say, you have to have a heart. You have to have chambers, you have to have veins, you have to have arteries. I mean, they knew a lot about how the heart works as a pump. They say that a heart can be injured. You can have heart disease, but nothing is going to make the heart disappear. No way that the heart will disappear. So you've got to have a heart somewhere. You could find some diseases that affect the heart and it doesn't look very good and it may look very odd and unusual, but it's definitely there. So that's the answer to the first question. The chicken could not possibly be alive before it was shechted unless it had a heart. And even if the heart was diseased, you would find it in some form or the other after the shechita, when you put your hands in and you take out the inner organs and you check them to see whether there's any tarfut or not, which is what we do today, which is the shochet ubodek. We call a shochet in rabbinical Hebrew shin vav gershayim bet shochet ubodek. The job of the shochet is also to check the internal organs for tarfut. In the old days, of course, they did it at home, and that brings us back to our case. But the second question that was asked is as follows. Line 13. And now the medical faculty of Hala replies, 18th century, to Rabbi Eibeshitz, who had very good relations with Christians, with academics, with astronomers, mathematicians, and all of that jazz. And I also threw in Christian Kabbalah when I spoke to you last time. Of sheniftach ke'en tarnegol or avazin. You've got a bird, like a chicken or a goose. Velonim sabolev. There's no heart. Is it possible, doctors were asked, to say that perhaps another organ fulfilled the function of the heart? So there's no heart, which indicates the chicken is treif, but the chicken could live, which is what we're trying to get to in the anti-Chacham Tzvi camp. Okay, so the doctors say, we want to make this very clear. לנמנע טבע קיים שיחיה שום בר חי עם עוף עם בהמה אם לא יהיה שם לב. No living creature can exist without a heart. או על כל פנים איזה איבר או בשר חי שתבניתו או מתכונתו כתבנית הלב. Or something that looks and functions like a heart. דהיינו שיש בו חלל, it has the heart cavity, גם ורידים ושופכים מוכנים לתנועת הדם וסיבובו. And you need a circulatory system, the basis of which is the pump that we call the heart, that tremendous muscle. לפיכך אם יש שם איבר אחד כזה, כדמות וכתבניתו, if you have such an organ that fulfills this description, בעלי שני חללים, with two spaces, גם שני אוזניים, and two lobes, ושני ורידים ועורקים, and you have the venous system and the arterial system, מוכנים לתנועת הדם, and you have the circulatory system, בוודאי אפשר שתחיה הבהמה הזאת. So the doctors in Hala give Rabbi Eibeshitz this. It is possible that an animal can live without a heart, and there may be a possibility that some other organ does the job of a heart. Okay, vitkayem zman rav, and it can live for as long as it will live. Even though it doesn't look like a heart. Maybe elsewhere in the chest. Either above the heart or למטה ממנו, או בצד אחרת ממה שדרכו להיות שם. It has to be close. כל זאת הסכמנו ולראיה באנו על החתום עד כאן התשובה. So the first bit of the opinion of the physicians at the medical faculty in Hala was that no living being can exist without a heart. Number two, is it possible that there could be another organ that would do the job of a heart? They're not prepared to say no. They're not prepared to say no, but it would have to be exactly functionally a heart. Have we found such an organ? Of course, we have not. But Rabbi Eibeshitz, going back, I mean, it may be little in the realm of logic and analytical, logical positivism. What do we know and what do we not know? We know a lot, but do we know everything? And can we absolutely discount the possibility that this one chicken that apparently did not have a heart when the animal was checked was able to live on the basis of another organ that we simply have not identified up until now because science is open to change? Are you convinced? You can think about that. I'll let you do that. I don't have to answer the question, fortunately. But what I do want to do is I want to get into the upper jaw. Okay? Now, I want to show you a contrast with the Chacham Tzvi, who came out and said, science is not wrong. Halacha cannot be relied upon in this case. There is another way of doing it, less head-on, less tempestuous, less passionate, okay? And here I'm going to go to the Rambam. Well, what may seem very insignificant, but it is important. And next week, we're going to go deeply into the question of science versus halacha. But this is our entree through the Tshuva Chacham Tzvi. There's a Mishnah in Masechet Chulin that says, Nital lechi hatachton kshera. What's lechi hatachton?
La joue.
What's lechi hatachton?
The jaw.
The lower jaw.
Bone.
Right, the lower jaw. Nital means it is missing. All right, can any animal live without a lower jaw? Probably not, because it can't eat. Answer, doesn't mean that it has no lower jaw. The lower jaw is hanging down. It's away from its place, but it can still be used, okay? Otherwise, the animal would starve to death. So we have to qualify this and say that nital lechi hatachton is not where it ought to be. So the Mishnah says, don't worry. A displaced lower jaw doesn't make an animal trait because it's not going to bring about its death within 12 months. It can still eat. It's not a very efficient way of eating, but it can live. Rambam, Hilchot Shchita, number 5. What does he say there? Okay. Robert Vassal, would you like to read? If you're here.
Yes.
Okay,
Rambam,
line
Hilchot
13,
Shchita.
לחי העליון.
לחי העליון שניטל טרפה, אבל אם ניטל התחתון, הרי היא מותרת.
הרי זו מותרת. So what's the Rambam saying? Now, he's not contradicting the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if the lower jaw is displaced, the animal is kosher. Don't worry. But what does he do? He says, what is the lechi ha'elyon?
The upper jaw.
Upper jaw. The upper jaw, if that is missing, and it's really out of its place completely, then the Rambam says it's treifa. Does the Mishnah talk about the upper jaw?
No.
No. Now, we learned that you may not deviate from the list of treifot.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Rambam has apparently added the upper jaw. How can he do that? He's become a heretic, according to the Rashba. Now, this was picked up. Okay, the Rambam in his codification of halacha, Hilchot Treifot, okay, Hilchot Shchita, the laws of Treifa, has added the upper jaw. Mishnah and the Gemara do not mention the upper jaw. So we would say that the upper jaw, if it's displaced, would be kosher. But no, Rambam says it's treif. But it doesn't say so in the Gemara. And we said that the list of treifot is a closed list. So how can the Rambam add? Now we have a tshuva of the Rambam to Chachmei Lunel in south of France. Sheila. Chachmei Lunel, the sages of Lunel, read the Rambam's Mishneh Torah, and they picked up on all sorts of things. Is Yael Berman? Is Yael Berman around?
Yes.
Okay, Yael, I'd like to get you to read the tshuva of the Rambam to Chachmei Lunel. Sheila.
שאלה, בספר קדושה, בהלכות מאכלות אסורות, בהלכות טרפות, נמצא כתוב, בהמה שניטל לחי העליון של הטרפה. ואנחנו בעניותנו לא שמענו עד היום הזה, ולא מצאנו כתוב כן בשום חיבור, הנעשה בשום לשון, והיה בעינינו דבר זה פלא.
We haven't found this anywhere. Upper jaw, treif, not in Hebrew, not in Arabic, not in Aramaic, not in Judeo-Spanish. There is no evidence for this. So Rambam, what are you doing? Are you being a heretic, okay? To be a little coarse about this. Tshuva.
תשובה, הלחי התחתון הוא המתנדנד ברוב בעלי החיים בשעת אכילה.
Now the Rambam is a scientist, so he says, look, I know what goes on in veterinary science. You should know that the lower jaw often moves about a lot in animals when they eat. Sometimes it gets disengaged, looks as if it's not there, nital. But in fact, it is there, because if it wasn't, if it couldn't eat at all, then it would die. So we're talking about a displaced and weakened lower jaw. ומפני זה,
ומפני זה נשמט פעמים רבות.
sometimes it really hangs down. It looks as if it's just hanging on by a thread.
ואם יחזירוהו במהרה יחזור, ואם לא יחזירוה, אפילו ניטל לא ימות החי.
And it's not tragic because if it doesn't get back into position, it can still eat. It'll still be able to do some of the ruminating it needs to do in order to get the grass, whatever it is, eating digested. אבל
לחי העליון קבוע הוא, והחותם הקבוע בו הוא עיקר נשמת רוח החיים הנכנסת ללב דרך הריאה עם הנשימה שתיכנס מן הפה, ואותו הלחי העליון כמו גג הוא לכסות הקנה כדי שלא תיכנס הרוח, והיא קרה לריאה וימות החי אם ינטל הלחי העליון, כי אז נמצא פי הקנה מגולה לאוויר, ומיד תיכנס בו הרוח בכל נשימה ונשימה.
What's the purpose of the upper jaw, in addition to helping chew? It preserves the heat and keeps the cold out. And these animals are out in the field all day, gets cold. The cold air comes in and it causes lung disease. And many of these ruminants will die of lung disease. And that's why the whole issue of glut kosher is the abrasions of the lung and whether the lung is actually seriously affected or not. In other words, the upper jaw affects the whole health of an animal. If it doesn't have an upper jaw, it is in very serious trouble indeed. So the Rambam is applying veterinary science here, okay? וכיוצא.
תקרר הריאה והלב ותמות הבהמה.
Now remember, we are in the age of Galen and innate heat. Look it up, innate heat. Everybody believed in the Middle Ages it was very important to keep heat in the body so that all the organs could function well. I'm not going to go into Aristotle's four humors, but definitely the heat is very important. And that's why you needed to breathe, because the heart gets very hot, overheated, and you need to cool it down. ואין לך מי.
מי שאין כמוה חיה יותר מזו.
And the Rambam is very smart. He says, now I'm applying the Gemara. The Gemara defines a treifa as an animal that cannot live for more than 12 months. If an animal doesn't have an upper jaw, it will definitely not live 12 months. So it has to be treif. But the list in the Mishnah and the Gemara doesn't include lechi elyon. How can I break the numerous clauses and, as it were, add an upper jaw? Mipnei zeh.
ומפני זה מנו נטילת לחי התחתון דווקא בכשרות, לא העליון.
The Rambam is being very sneaky. He says the fact that the halacha mentions that the lower jaw does not render the animal treif and is kosher implies that, without being said, that the removal of the upper jaw would make it treif and not kosher. Okay? Very sneaky. וזה
שאמרתם, שלא שמעתם ולא ראיתם בחיבור, מי שמנה טרפה זו, הרבה דברים לא יזכירו אותם המפרשים, מפני שלא שמו דעתם להם, וכשיבין אדם באותם הדברים, יראו.
And the Rambam is much more delicate than Chacham Tzvi. First of all, he uses a halakhic argument. Since we learned that the loss of the lower jaw makes the animal kosher, we could infer through silence or through not saying, okay, that the upper jaw does make the animal treif. And in any case, now he gets a little on the, a little edgy. And he says perhaps previous halachic authorities who codified the laws of Tarfut didn't know enough about veterinary science in order to make that, to get to that assumption. But if they would have understood anything about veterinary science, then they would have said it. So again, the Rambam is much less aggressive than Chacham Tzvi. I mean, he lived in a different era, but he does this in a very careful fashion. Okay? In other words, he uses halakhic type arguments to base his addition to the list of
What if the animal is artificially fed?
He's not talking about that. And I don't think they fed too many animals artificially in the 12th century or in the 13th century. Okay? But I mean, correct. But Jack, exactly, this is the point. Da'aka. You could come today with an animal that's being fed officially, artificially. You're giving it food all the time. It doesn't need its jaw. You're somehow compensating for all the things that the four stomachs of ruminants do. It would still be treif if it didn't have the upper jaw according to the Rambam, because that's halakha. Okay? But the Rambam sneakily has projected onto the list, the closed, apparently closed list of treifot, another tarfut. But he's done it, as I said, without the aggressive and in-your-face argument of Chacham Tzvi. And it may be the way to go. Let's have a look. What does the Kesef Mishneh say about this fact that the Rambam puts in the upper jaw? Jean, would you like to read Lechi ha'elyon shenital trefa?
Lechi ha'elyon shenital trefa. Hator tama al Rabbeinu shekach katav, ou shekatav kach, v'chi lehosif al ha'trefot, yesh?
Yes. How can the Rambam add? How can he add? This is our halachic starting point. Ve'en ledaktek.
Ve'en ledaktek mide hirshir betachton de be'elyon trefa de legoufe itzterich la'ashmuinan.
Now the Torah, of course, says, and don't kid us, Rambam. You want to say that the fact that the halacha says that the loss of the lower jaw is kasher, that means, no, we need to know about, you cannot derive, this goes back to the laws of Gzera Shava, when you can make a drasha. In other words, if you need something for its own sake, you cannot use it as a projection for a law that is derived. In other words, it's been used up. We need to know about the lower jaw. Why are you, Rambam, trying to say that the lower jaw permission in the Mishnah is only a catalyst for learning about the upper jaw, because the only thing that's treif would be the loss of the upper jaw. The Chachmei Babel,
הוגשה להם כך, ושאלו לרבנו,
they asked the Rambam, ורבנו
בתשובתה נזהר מקושיה זו, וכתב שטרפות זה בכלל מה ששנינה נשנינו, זה הכלל, כל שאין כמוה חיה טרפה.
So, the Kesef Mishnah, Rabbi Karo in his Kesef Mishnah, not in Shulchan Aruch or Bet Yosef, wants to say, Rambam actually relies upon the rule in the Halakha, since he's shown you that an animal without an upper jaw cannot possibly live, then it falls within the definition of the Mishnah. But the definition of the Mishnah is linked by the Gemara to the list of Trefot. Never mind. Rabbi Karo did his best. I'm now going to get into something fairly interesting, but shortness of time, we'll leave it to next time, which is the human trefa and what that may say about definition of death of human beings and heart transplants. But in the meantime, we'll just end up with Rabbi.
May I ask something?
Dessler. Yes,
Yes.
you're not.
They didn't consider one thing, and that is, if a baby animal is born without upper or lower jaw, it cannot suck the milk, and it cannot survive this way.
All right. So I don't think he was talking about a newly born. Rambam is talking about an animal which is
There is hardly an animal which will develop without a lower jaw or an upper jaw.
Okay.
Because
The lower
of being a
jaw,
baby.
right? The lower jaw became dislocated later on in the animal's life, but it's not entirely missing. It's hanging. We're talking about a hanging, okay?
It's not a malformation.
No. It is definitely pulled down and it's hanging on, but it can still be used. Let's just end this up with an interesting statement. Rabbi Eliezer Dessler, we can talk a lot about him, but he's definitely the ideologue of the Haredi yeshiva world. His Michtav Me Eliyahu, its many volumes, have crafted Haredi Hashkafa. Yitz, would you like please to read a brief item from the Michtav Me Eliyahu on this? He was the Mashgiach of Ponovitch, by the way, at the end of his life, but he did pass through. He was a Lithuanian, a nephew of Reb Chaim Ozer Grodzinski, went with his father, who was ill, to London and stayed there. Actually, he stayed in Britain, and he was a private tutor to the Sassoon family in Letchworth. So he was okay. He didn't need to work as a rabbi otherwise he probably would have starved to death because at that time. And he was also the founder of the Gateshead Kollel. And it was the Gateshead Kollel in 1942 when he founded it in the war that actually made Gateshead into the powerhouse of learning that it did become. It had a yeshiva from 1924, but it was kind of an okay yeshiva. Manchester was certainly a more famous yeshiva than the Gateshead. But once the Kollel came and then they opened up the girls' seminary and the boarding school, then the whole thing took off and it became the powerhouse for the Haredi rabbinic leadership in Britain. Halachic rules.
Halachic rules that are shown to be based on outdated science are not to be changed. The laws are eternally valid.
Science has shown that this law doesn't apply, we don't change it. The laws are
eternally valid and are independent of science, since there are more reasons for the laws than those recorded in the Talmud. In those cases in which the Talmud...
In other words, there may be other reasons that we haven't discovered. Again, echoing Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz, what do we know and what do we not know? In those cases
in which the Talmud explains a law in terms of a discredited scientific theory, we must search for current theories that will justify it. We never change laws because contemporary scientific developments render their original reasoning obsolete.
That's clear cut. Okay. Now, the Rambam is a bit of an exception to this, but he did it very nicely and very delicately. Difference between the Rambam and the Chacham Shvi. What the Rambam did in relation to the human treifa and where the heartless chicken takes us into the definition of death and the possibility of heart transplants all awaits us in Yirtzeh Hashem next week. So There we are. I will make sure that I go in next week through Zoom and not through the email, and hopefully we will not have any problems starting. Does anybody have a comment? Would anybody like to say something?
Well,
I'd just like to ask, according to the Rambam,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
sorry,
Okay,
the
so
Rambam doesn't seem to accept the principle that you stated, namely that it's a numerous clausus. The Rambam would say, why would the Gemara say, or the Mishnah, sorry, say zeh haklal if we're not going to apply any klal?
Well, Rabbi Yosef Karo in the case of Mishnah says something like that, but it's all apologetics. The Rambam does not in any way detract or attack. What he says is that numerous clausus, unless it was not the number, it's the principle. So in the case, the number's the same. It's the same number. Lower jaw doesn't matter. So it's like you take it away from the sum. So we've discounted the lower jaw.
He's added up a jaw in a sense.
No. Well, he has, according to the way he put it. If you read him and you followed me, he actually says the reason for putting the lower jaw in was only to indicate that we should make the upper jaw treif. Okay. That is pushing it. But then he also says that had the Chachamim of the past, who insist upon a literal number, understood that, they would have agreed with him, which is also something. But the Rambam, and I can give you other examples of this, you're quite right in the sense that the Rambam is definitely very respectful of intellectual knowledge. He says in his famous letter on astrology, we only believe three things. One, intellectual knowledge like 2 and 2 makes 4. 2, empirical knowledge, which we see, taste, touch, smell, or hear, because God gave us eyes in the front and not in the back, so that we should use them. And 3, valid traditional halacha. So he defines, the Rambam is famous for this, what is valid traditional halacha. So in his view, valid traditional halacha is that the phrase in the Gemara about the lower jaw is actually a code for the upper jaw. So he's okay with the rule of we do not add. He's okay, and he says this is specifically necessary because why would the lower jaw be trefa? An animal can live for ages. You're not without a lower jaw strongly attached, okay? But the upper jaw is going to become ill, and many animals that graze all the time get diseased lungs because they get too cold, they're outside too much. That's why in the winter, in cold places, they have to bring all the sheep inside and keep them warm through the winter. Otherwise, and the upper jaw keeps them. So it's quite something, an effort that the Rambam made. But unlike Chacham Tzvi, he didn't simply say, you're an idiot if you don't believe science and that you cannot live without a heart. He's much more careful. And I can show you, and I will show you, and we'll have a look next time, at the way the Minchat Chinuch picks up on the Rambam and says, he does these little changes because he's a scientist, but he always makes sure that somehow they are acceptable from a halachic perspective as well. And had Chacham Tzvi been more of a Maimonidean, he might have had an easier life and not have gotten so upset by the heartless chicken. Okay, so all being well, next week, which will be our last shiur for about a month, because after that, we will be traveling in Yetzer Hashem. Who knows, though, what happens? Anyhow, we hope for the
you go to Zurich.
And we're coming to Zurich, and as I told Jean, and I'm mentioning to Jack, and to you, and to Michael, wherever he is, I would love to be able to meet all of you in person in Zurich, in Yetzer Hashem. Okay? And by the way, happy Motzei Tu B'Av. Bye for now.
Same to you, all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good
Thank
evening.
you very much.
Rabbi Sinclair, can you stay on for a minute? I want to ask you a question.
Yeah. You're all free to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ramon.
I read Maoz Kahana's book on this subject, on the Tarnagolet Chasrat Halev.
Right.
And I think that he's got the whole thing all wrong. And I was wondering if you have an opinion about it. Did you see this book?
I know the book exists, but I haven't really read the bit. I haven't really read the book through
Okay,
at all. But
so
I know it is a pile of books on my shelf due to be read.
I have such a pile right here too as well.
Yeah. Okay.
So I did read through the book, and the whole book is based on the starting point is the Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz's getting a letter from Halle. His whole argument is that Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz does rely on science, and the rest of the book is to put that into the context of what's going on in the early 18th century, or 18th century. And he hardly mentions, or at least I didn't see his mentioning about the argument that science is constantly changing, and that's why you can't rely on science. It seems to me that Eibeshitz's letter to the Halle serves as only as letamech. You, Chacham Tzvi, want to rely on science. Well, not only you can't rely on science because it's going to change, the scientists today don't say what you say they say. So I think the entire premise of the book is wrong. I was hoping to hear your reaction.
From what you've said, I would agree with you. I mean, as far as I know, the turn to the Faculty of Medicine in Halle was quite a few years after he had responded to the Chacham Tzvi in his Kreti and Pleti. In other words, I think it was like something that he pursued after the fact. And I think that the whole point is that science cannot be relied upon.
Right.
If it's and it is in a way ulatamech. Perhaps, I mean, he would seem to be trying to buttress his position in relation possibly to an ongoing debate about the place of science and halacha, which at this time there are similar discussions in relation to different areas of halacha. There's one in relation to the issue of castration with the Rabbi Bloch, a famous, again, a tshuva that was circulated with rabbis and pitted the traditional halachic approach to the isur of sirus to what science actually did and how it explained the ramifications of such a castration. So it was an issue that came up at the time, but I think that Rabbi Yonatan Eibeshitz was definitely committed to the view that halacha takes precedence over, and in fact, he was happy with the response from Halle, the second bit, because it said that he could say, well, even scientists agree that perhaps not everything that's taken to be absolutely certain in science actually is really certain. And I got them to agree that there may be a possibility of having some type of organ that fulfills the function of the heart that could be, even though he didn't put this in, even though we haven't found it yet. So I would have to read Maoz Kahana, but from a historical perspective, I'm telling you now, the turn to Halle was way after he's written his original tshuva. So he's not basing himself on science at all. He just went back to it and thought it would be nice if I could buttress my argument disparaging Chacham Tzvi if I could get a little bit of scientific support. So I'm not sure what the timeline is, but I mean, I would have to look at Kahana. I think he's a very careful academic, as far as I know. But
I thought so as well. And when you get around to reading Kahana, I would appreciate to hear your reaction. If you see the book the same way that I did.
Okay.
Maybe I misread the book.
I will try. As I said, it's kind of not at the top of my list.
Yes, I understand.
Kind of halfway, and I'm giving lectures in Switzerland and in other places, and also in Bet Knesset Hanassi, a scholar in residence, and this and that. And I have 3 papers to write and a new course to give at Fordham.
Gotcha.
So I'm not sure when I will get to it, but
Okay.
on the basis of what you said, I don't think it's right at all. Okay?
Yes. Thank you.
Would anybody else, if you're still around, like to chime in? Okay, so I will in fact say Erev Tov, Laila Tov, and Busorot Tovot. Marcel, where is your background? Is it Yellowstone National Park?
You've been to Iceland. There's still an Iceland where there's that gap between the tectonic plates.
There is indeed the tectonic plates. We stood there and you can see the gap.
Yeah, that's it.
In Iceland. Absolutely. And those geysers just spurting up all over the place. It's an amazing place. Okay. Happy travels. Bye for now.
Bye.
I should stop the recording. Okay, record. Let's stop. Pause.